It's 300 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. You live in a small town of about 40 people or so. One of the people in your town has been found murdered in a pool of his own blood. The woman who found him claims that he was already dead and that there was no one around when she came upon his corpse. You have another piece of evidence, which is a knife lodged in his back. A farmer comes forward and says he recognized the knife and that it's his neighbor's. His neighbor then comes forward and says it's his knife, but he's not the one who committed the crime. He claims that he thinks it was the woman who stole his knife and then murdered the man. This raises one question. What is fact? My name is Jalen Griffin, and I've come to talk about crime, but more specifically, forensic medicine. Crime has been a part of human history since there have been rules to delegate society, while forensic medicine is still relatively new. It has only been developed and matured in the last century and a half. Before this, justice systems relied on tests that played on the human psyche to determine who was lying and who was not, and other governments decided they would only charge people who they thought were guilty without concrete evidence. Eventually, people decided that this was not true justice. The book, The Poisoner's Handbook, follows the journey of two very important people in toxicology's history. The first being pathologist Charles Norris. Before I move on, I would just like to clarify that a pathologist is somebody who studies bodily tissues and fluids. As you can see, this would be very important when trying to understand what poisons do to someone's body. His skill set matched perfectly for the chemist Alexander Gettler, who could identify the poisons. Chemicals used throughout it. In these stories, it describes different cases, the methods in which the poison was used, and the method at which it was identified. The book, in the beginning, however, describes a game of cat and mouse played between poisoners and prosecutors, where prosecutors would identify a new poison, and poisoners would promptly switch to another. One example of this would be the use of metallic alkaloid poisons, where after, for a long time, they were untraceable in the human body. Prosecutors finally figured out how to identify them. Then, poisoners promptly switched to plant-based alkaloid poisons. This led prosecutors to become frustrated. Blum even went so far as to quote a French prosecutor who said, "Henceforth, let us tell would-be poisoners, do not use metallic poisons, for they leave traces. Use plant poisons. Fear nothing, your crime will go unpunished." It was another Frenchman, the chemist, by the name of Jean Servais Stas. He was the first to be able to isolate nicotine in a human corpse. It was this brilliant discovery that paved the way for other scientists to eventually be able to identify and isolate trace amounts of other alkaloid plant-based poisons. The prohibition also added to the consumption of deadly chemicals like wood alcohol. Its lethality, in fact, earned it a spot in the 11 poisons mentioned in Blum's novel. With just a teaspoonful, wood alcohol could cause blindness, and a tumblerful could kill a man. Also, a problem was the availability of these different poisons. For example, arsenic could be found in drugstores, grocery stores, and garden supplies. One example of arsenic would be the Shelbourne Crisis. Shelbourne was a local cafe and bakery that was frequented by local office's workers. It was a popular place to go to eat for lunch. Among the workers that went here on the fateful day was Lillian Goetz. Popular at the cafe and bakery were the desserts, particularly the huckleberry pies. Now, on the day of the crisis, someone slipped into the kitchen and poisoned the pies with arsenic. It was baked into the pie crust because, when baked with oxygen, arsenic becomes a fine white powder that's excellent to slip into alcoholic drinks and desserts. It is known as the inheritance drug because of how often it was used to kill family members because of its ability to blend well into food. Now, on this day, Lillian Goetz and workers on all of the 12 floors of the office building were rushed to hospitals and had their stomachs pumped from the arsenic. Unfortunately, Lillian was one of the few to die. Arsenic was a favorite in food murders because of how excellently well it blended with the taste of food. If used by an experienced poisoner, you could completely miss the metallic and gritty taste of arsenic in your food. It was a favorite among the Borgias in the 18th century, who were famous for their dinner politics and poison, where they would kill people they did not feel supported their cause by slipping one of their own special concentrations of arsenic and other poisons into their food. Now here in 1920s New York, would-be poisoners mimicked the actions of the Borgias, but instead, it wasn't a push for power, but it seemed more like experiments done to see how lethal the poison was and what concentrations to use for future murders. It also became a favorite of people who got away with arsenic murders and developed a lust for killing. Charles Norris, the pathologist, got onto examining the different cadavers left behind by the killer at the Shelbourne crisis. Along with this, he battled 2 other cases that summer and the chaos left behind prohibition that ravaged his very own family. As you can see, toxicology is its own bottom-to-top story, where it went from a hair-pullingly frustrating subject to an undeniable voice in the courtroom. In the video I'm about to show you, I asked the police officer how forensic medicine helped and related to his job.
My name is Kerwin Smith. I'm a federal police officer for the Department of Homeland Security. I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years, and I understand today's topic is on forensic medicine. I'd like to emphasize and stress that forensic medicine is a very important part of law enforcement when it comes to trying to prove a case. The American justice system standard for proving someone guilty is beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not possible, not possibly, not could have been, might have been, but beyond a reasonable doubt. With that being the standard, the use of forensic medicine is very important to prove someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But just as importantly, it can also prove that someone has not committed a crime, eliminate them as a suspect, and exonerate them from a case.
The work Norris and Gettler put forth was not in vain because it made the job of a poisoner unprofitable to say the least. Before I leave off today, I'd also like to point out that there's more to forensic medicine than just toxicology. There's ballistics, fingerprinting, anthropology, DNA, and much more. Also, though a valid subject, it is not completely perfected yet, and there are many more improvements to come. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope you have a better understanding of the history of forensic medicine.